What do you think the biggest challenge for community groups and volunteer organisations is today?
One would be, I suppose, getting volunteers or suitable volunteers, and secondly is holding on to the funding.
I would say there are two would be, I'm going to give you two rather than one. So the first is that I am afraid at the moment it has still not recovered from the decimation that has happened during the recession, and that the funding and the public commitment to, I don't mean the commitment of the public, I mean the commitment of the state to this sector is still very weak, and I think that's a real challenge. And the second thing is, I think a tremendous amount of demand is being put on volunteers themselves. And while all of the structures are excellent and they're all a very good idea, the degree of engagement that's required is huge. And when you add that then to the new legal requirements and the new governance requirements, etc., I would be concerned that over time volunteer burnout is going to become a major issue.
Yes, the biggest challenge is to get people nowadays to participate and get involved, because there's so many other distractions that quite a few don't really want to tie themselves down to anything. I mean, I've asked several people, like, are you in any committee or any of that? They say, no, I haven't time or not interested, and it's disappointing. Because I find it's actually very good. I find it very interesting and good to see things improve and develop, you know.
Local expertise is an invaluable asset to any community. In the early years, we tended to look outside for help and advice. But in recent times, we've had much greater success in tapping into local resources. So we've tried to use that expertise as much as possible. And of course the key to all of that is volunteerism. People giving their time and their energy freely, striving for a better community for themselves and for their children.
Still don't really know what the public participation network is. So you probably think the PPN is a department of the council, but it's not. The county council asked for a PPN number in support of the Public Participation Network, which is a community and voluntary sector organisation just like your own. But it's to encourage everyone in the county to be a member, so then everyone gets the same information about training, about funding, about being a representative on a really important county council committee. While before, maybe everyone didn't hear about that or get to know about it.
You, by having your say, will influence policy, and then the government will have to sit up and take notice of what you say. Dennis also spoke about, the pride and satisfaction that you can take in your local area. That in turn benefits the environment, benefits again our health and well-being, and in turn benefits the local economy.
There's two or three different key things I think for the PPN. One is a source of information, and as I was delighted to hear the website being so praised there, because that is one way in which a lot of information can be made available easily that isn't otherwise easily available. And obviously the second fundamental role is the representative role, so that there's a structured way in which community and voluntary groups can be the community voluntary sector can be represented on statutory bodies and on decision-making bodies and resource allocating bodies, so that grassroots perspective can be brought to bear.
What I quickly found out is that it's really difficult to get comprehensive and accessible information on how to get more funding, where do you access training, how do those trainings work, what types of trainings are mandatory versus things that you might just want to do to strengthen maybe the skills of your volunteers and your members. So I spent a couple of weeks doing all of this research for you to try to put together a starting point, just to give you a hub for your network to build up your organization, rather than going to Google and having to search hundreds of sites and spend hours and hours looking through it.
Another thing I have just noticed looking around is there's no young people.
Now, what did I say to you earlier? I said that, I did mention that. They're all over 50, 60, 70, 80, the age group. Why have we not got younger people doing attending these sort of functions?
Why have we not? Have you got any idea?
Yeah, but I'd say if you go to Bertin, you'll have the smallest child when they do the festival in Holy Cross. You know, the Country Western Day in Holy Cross?
Yeah.
Where you have the smallest child with a black sack to the oldest adult involved in Holy Cross. Yeah. And they're, go on, you talk about Yeah. And so I think people don't do meetings, but they'll come on and you invite. It's all by invitation.
From my experience, it's not always an unwillingness of groups like this to have young people. It actually is an unwillingness of young people to participate. I think there seems to be a challenge to young people. Now, whether it is that they feel they won't be heard, that they feel there's no point, or whether it is that they're too busy doing other things, I honestly don't know. But I think historically that kind of level of participation has tended to be people who aren't all that young have tended to be the ones who participated in this kind of activity. I think that's just the reality of life, you know. When you're younger, you tend to be focusing on other things.
It's the problem in a lot of committees to get young people to come in and get involved, because a lot of people nowadays are way past their sell-by date, if you like that, including myself. But there's not enough people coming in. I'm even talking about things like, say, Lions clubs. The majority of them are simply too old, and they're probably actually putting young people maybe from coming in because they could be seen as a barrier, you know. They say this is only an old folks kind of a...
I was going to ask, what do you think the biggest challenges are for the community and voluntary sector?
Funding.
Funding is the biggest one, really.
Really?
Yeah.
Isn't it? Of course it is. Yeah. I was going to go funding as I wait and see what they say. Yeah, because the point is that I suppose it's so diverse. I mean, even in this room, the amount of different community groups from different areas, no, I don't think so. And who are different, looking at different aspects of community, yet they all have the underlying issue that they can't expand without funding, you know?
I suppose I'm just talking about my own group. It's just resources, you know, just resources for even people to travel out to meetings and time and just general support. I find that most volunteers, they're happy to go to meetings if they can get petrol. They're not looking for great wages, but people sort of up in North Tip who want to go to a meeting down in South Tipperary, I mean, it is an issue. Sort of say, well, can't really afford to do that, and it's like small things. It's not sort of the giant funding issues that hinder volunteerism. It's a small little, I suppose, petty cash kind of things that I notice when I work with community council that people actually think about, because they're in very straitened economic situations anyway. They have to think about these kind of things. Then there's capacity, you know, having the capacity and the knowledge and the confidence to access all that information and process and do applications, be familiar with public procurement and all these issues which are around applying for grants and bridging funding and all of that. Capacity building as well in the larger sense.
To keep it renewed and find new younger people to come in and take people's places when other people need to leave. It's very hard to keep that momentum going. The same few do the same organising and work in different community organisations, in my opinion.
I think to have the group all realise what they're working towards, because sometimes there seem to be little divisions and breaks in it, and then that leads to conflict, it leads to split, and then the group is lessened and you lose people. So people need to know what they're getting involved in when they become involved, and then good communication internally. I mean, this wonderful discussion here today showed you how it should be done.
I would see it as an issue. I don't do an awful lot of voluntary work, but I work to support voluntary groups, and what I find is it's the same few and they are getting older, and it seems to be very hard with whether it's the technology of today, whether it's the lack of belief that actually our voice will do anything. What's the point? There's a real disenfranchised huge amount of the population, and as you say, a lot of them are youth, and a lot of, you know, the non-Irish nationals, all that sort of, they're not aware of these. We're not bringing them in yet. I think that's a huge challenge.
You know, the challenge of getting young people involved.
I think there's an equal challenge of getting the older generation involved, and that's where they can come in with their heritage, because they have fantastic stories, you know, and experiences they live through. And if we don't capture those now, an awful lot of those, and even the old skills are going to be lost. So I think there's a challenge in getting the older people in as much as there is getting the younger people involved. Because they definitely, the older generation have an awful lot to add.
Because that's what it's about, really, heritage. It's like inheritance. So therefore there has to be the intergenerational kind of connectivity.
Mar Dermot Shannockle, Asca Akela of Armid. Maybe at times we irritate each other, but more often we help and comfort each other. As a community, we work together, we play together, we grieve together. Indeed, we live in the shelter of each other.